The books of Esther and Jonah come to us from a deep crisis within Israel's history. As a people, they are scattered throughout the Persian world more than at any time in their history. There is no self-rule. They live in constant contact with various peoples throughout the world. Discussions about God often circulate around how the people of God should relate to the other. How should Jews respond to Gentiles? How does the God of Israel relate to the foreigner? What does God think about the other, and how should we? Such questions drive these two insightful narratives. Listen as Sidney White Crawford directs us through these difficult and perhaps unfamiliar questions about these familiar biblical stories.
The books of Esther and Jonah come to us from the Persian period in Jewish history. During this time, the Persian Empire ruled over all the Jews, both those in the land of Judah and those who lived outside in the diaspora or dispersion. This period, which lasted from Cyrus's conquest of the Babylonian Empire in 538 BCE until Alexander's conquest of the Persian Empire in 332 BCE, was a time of transition and challenge for the Jews. The Jews did not enjoy self-government, and for the first time, more Jews lived outside the historical land of Israel than inside it. These circumstances created challenges for the Jews. How were they to interact with their foreign governments? What should their relations be with the Gentiles among whom they found themselves? What did it mean to be a Jew, a worshiper of the God of Israel, in this new environment? And, maybe most importantly, where was the God of Israel in this different, expanded world? Was God just the God of Israel, or did his power extend beyond Israel into the Gentile nations? Esther and Jonah, in different ways, tackle these questions. Esther is part of the Ketuvim, or writings, in the Hebrew Bible. Esther was written in the late 4th or early 3rd centuries BCE and is set in the Persian Empire during the reign of Xerxes, who ruled from 486 to 465 BCE. The book of Esther is a short novel. Unlike earlier biblical books, it is meant to be read, not recited out loud. The story of Esther is fictional. It is very unlikely that the events narrated in the story of Esther actually happened. But we shouldn't worry about that. The point of Esther is to teach a lesson. It teaches Jews how to function successfully in a Gentile world. Esther, the heroine of the story, marries the Persian king, skillfully uses her available resources to defeat the enemy of the Jews, Haman, and persuades the king to promote her cousin Mordecai to the second highest rank in the empire. This activity is beneficial not only for Jews, but also for Gentiles. The writer of the story thus promotes the idea that Jews and Gentiles can live together harmoniously and with mutual respect in the diaspora world. The writer does this by using humor. Esther is a very funny book, but the purpose is deadly serious, for the Jews, in order to survive as a people, must learn to cope in the new and strange environment of a Gentile kingdom. The most striking feature of the book of Esther in the Hebrew Bible is that God is never referred to, not even in passing. There are no prayers, no mention of the temple in Jerusalem, no acknowledgement of the law, and no specifically religious activity in the entire book. In chapter 4, verse 16, Esther does call for a fast, but the fast is not directed to God, and its purpose seems to be communal solidarity. Esther and Mordecai, although they identify themselves as Jews, seem to be completely assimilated in the Gentile Persian court. Esther, in fact, is married to a Gentile, lives in the palace with him, and does not seem concerned with or even aware of Jewish ritual practices such as dietary laws. This absence of religion is remarkable, even shocking in a biblical book. How can it be explained? The absence of religion in the book of Esther is deliberate and serves two main purposes. First, in Esther, Jewish identity is primarily ethnic. One is a Jew because one's parents are Jews. The practice of the law, or the lack of it, is a secondary characteristic of a primary Jewish identity. Esther, Mordecai, and the rest of the Jews are under threat, not for what they do, but for who they are. This gives the book of Esther a contemporary feel for 21st century readers, for whom the words Holocaust and ethnic cleansing have an ominous ring. The book of Esther stands as a warning not only to Jews to beware of the dangers lurking within the Gentile world, but also to other readers of the evils of ethnic conflict. Second, the absence of God at the forefront of the conflict in the book of Esther should feel familiar to contemporary readers. Esther and Mordecai have to proceed on faith, uncertain of whether or not they are doing God's will or what the outcome will be. Mordecai voices this in his speech to Esther in chapter 4, verse 14. "For if you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter, but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this." Another quarter may be a veiled reference to God, but it is certainly not explicit. And Mordecai's "who knows" is terribly poignant given the circumstances. How often do we, as people of faith, find ourselves in similar circumstances, trying to do our best, with God hidden somewhere in the background? This is the normal human experience, and this theology of Esther's is something we can easily relate to. Jonah is another biblical book that is easy for us to relate to. Jonah, like Esther, is a short story meant to be read, and its author uses broad humor to make a serious point. Also, like Esther, Jonah is fiction, but with a historical setting. In the Hebrew Bible, Jonah is part of the division Nevi'im, or prophets, and makes up one book of the 12 minor prophets. Unlike the other prophetic books, however, Jonah does not collect sayings of a prophet, but tells a deceptively simple story about a certain prophet named Jonah. This Jonah is simultaneously the worst and the most successful prophet in Israelite literature. The book of Jonah asks the question, is God the God only of the Israelites, or does God's power extend to other peoples? The answer, given in the first verses of the book, is yes. God commands Jonah to go to Nineveh, a Gentile city, and prophesy over it. Now, Nineveh wasn't just any Gentile city, but the capital of the great Assyrian Empire, which destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BCE. So if God's power extends to Nineveh, it indeed extends over the whole world. How then should the Jews react to that knowledge? Not the way Jonah does. His first action is to run away in the opposite direction from Nineveh by taking a ship to Tarshish. We as readers already know this is pointless. If God's power extends over the whole world, Jonah can't escape in a ship. And sure enough, God, who unlike in Esther is a very active character in Jonah, threatens to sink the ship in a storm. Jonah, admitting the storm is his fault, advises the sailors to toss him overboard. But the Gentile sailors, in one of the ironic twists in the book, prove more moral than Jonah and try everything else they can do to save the ship. Finally, begging Jonah's God's forgiveness, they hurl Jonah over the side, and the storm immediately ceases. Now comes the episode for which Jonah is best known. Jonah is swallowed by a great fish, which plunges him to the depths of the sea. We miss the point if we concentrate too much on the fish. The writer wants us to realize that God holds sway not only in the heavens, but also over the whole earth and even into the deeps of the sea. Jonah seems to get the point when he sings in chapter 2, verse 9, "Deliverance belongs to the Lord," and the fish vomits him out onto the beach. The second half of the book emphasizes the second theological point. This all-powerful God is also all-merciful. Jonah finally trudges off to Nineveh to carry out his call. Lo and behold, he has only to open his mouth, and the Ninevites are repenting in sackcloth and ashes. Jonah is the most successful prophet in history. Even the king on his throne repents to this new God. Echoing Mordecai's question, the king says in chapter 3, verse 9, "Who knows? God may relent and change his mind. He may turn from his fierce anger so that we do not perish." And God does forgive them and averts the planned calamity. This might be the end of the story, except for Jonah's reaction. Here is where so many of us so strongly identify with Jonah, though we may not want to admit it. Jonah is furious. His sense of justice is offended. How can God have mercy on these horrible, sinful Ninevites? Jonah turns God's mercy into a negative trait. He says in chapter 4, verses 2 and 3, "That is why I fled to Tarshish at the beginning, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and ready to relent from punishing. And now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live." Jonah has no fellow human feeling for the Ninevites. They seem to be wholly other for him. But God is patient with Jonah, trying to make him see God's position. God creates a plant to give Jonah shade, and then destroys the plant with a withering east wind. The subtle point is that God, who created the plant with which Jonah sympathizes, also created the Ninevites, with whom Jonah does not sympathize. But Jonah gets angry enough to die. Finally, God says, "You are concerned about the bush, for which you did not labor and which you did not grow. And should I not be concerned about Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also many animals?" The question is left unanswered, but we are meant to know the answer, for it comes out of the tragic events of Israel's history, the destruction of their kingdoms and the exile, and their subsequent survival and rebirth. God is the God of both Jews and Gentiles, and God's power and mercy extends over the whole world. That is the message that the books of Esther and Jonah carry forward from the Persian period and helps make possible the subsequent growth of Judaism and the birth of Christianity.